The Sovrith Collective had requested soldiers. This was, in retrospect, their first mistake. The request had gone through proper diplomatic channels. A formal petition submitted to the United Earth Expeditionary Command, routed through the Joint Species Accord, stamped with 11 different bureaucratic seals from 9 different species, and delivered to Earth's orbital command station in a language that took 3 translation AIs and 1 very tired human linguist 4 days to fully decode. The collective needed ground forces. They were fighting a war they were losing, a slow, grinding territorial conflict against the Hreth Dominion, a species that had evolved in high-gravity tunnel systems and had been weaponizing that evolutionary advantage for 300 years. The Hreth did not fight in open terrain. They dug. They tunneled. They collapsed ground beneath enemy formations and emerged from angles that conventional tactical modeling declared geometrically impossible. 11 Sovrith defensive lines had fallen in 8 months. 40,000 Sovrith soldiers had died in tunnels they never saw coming. The collective needed something that could follow the Hreth underground. They needed tunnel fighters. Earth said yes. Vera was the Sovrith liaison officer assigned to receive the human contingent at Forward Operating Base Thresh 7, a fortified plateau on the edge of contested territory on the planet Davari 4. She had prepared carefully. She had read every available document on human military structure. She had studied their physiology, bipedal, bilateral symmetry, warm-blooded, remarkably fragile compared to most combatant species, with a lifespan she found both short and improbable. She had noted their size, which fell somewhere between the Sovrith's smallest and tallest soldiers, and had concluded they were probably fine, serviceable, adequate for supplementary tunnel operations. She had not been prepared for Kalen. He arrived ahead of the main contingent. Protocol required a forward commander to assess the operational environment before troops deployed, and the human military apparently took this seriously enough to send their best. Kalen was tall for a human, which meant he was average height by Sovrith standards, but he moved through the receiving bay with a kind of compressed efficiency that made Vera's threat assessment instincts honed by 12 years of active combat, sit up and take notice despite themselves. He wore no visible weapons. His uniform was plain. He was carrying a cup of coffee he'd apparently produced from somewhere during the transit shuttle ride and had not yet finished. He looked around the receiving bay with calm gray eyes that were doing, Vera realized, exactly what her eyes did in an unknown space. Counting exits, assessing structural integrity, identifying choke points. She stepped forward. Commander Kalen, I am Senior Liaison Vera. Welcome to. The eastern wall is load-bearing, but the support columns are spaced too wide for the soil density. Kalen said pleasantly. You'd want to reinforce the 3rd and 7th column from the left if you're planning to hold this position through a Hreth tunnel assault. They'll hit the structural weak points first. He sipped his coffee. They always do. Vera stared at him. I read the incident reports from the 11 fallen defensive lines, he said, by way of explanation. He extended a hand in the human greeting gesture she had studied. Good to meet you. She shook it on autopilot. You read 11 incident reports during transit and the geological survey of Davari IV's subsurface composition, the Hreth Dominion's last 14 documented tunnel assault patterns, and your base's original construction schematics. He looked at the eastern wall again. 3rd and 7th column. Vera looked at the wall. Looked back at him. I will have engineering review it, she said slowly. I'd do it tonight, Kalen said. We're 2 kilometers from contested territory. He finished his coffee. The human contingent arrived the following morning. 200 soldiers. Vera had coordinated the arrival of military forces from 6 different species during her career. There was usually a pattern. The soldiers arrived. They looked impressive or they didn't. They were assigned quarters. They ate. They slept. They were briefed in the morning. The humans arrived at 0400. Not because they'd been scheduled at 0400. They'd been scheduled at 0700. They'd simply, as Kalen explained without apparent concern, decided to arrive early and conduct their own assessment of the base perimeter before the briefing. By the time Vera reached the staging ground at 0412, 200 human soldiers had mapped the entire exterior of FOB Thresh 7, identified 4 additional structural concerns beyond the ones Kalen had flagged, located what they described as a suspicious soil density variation 40 meters northeast of the perimeter wall that turned out when engineering investigated to be the early stages of a HFY tunnel approach that hadn't been detected by the collective sensor systems. The HFY had been 3 days from breaching the perimeter. The humans had found it in their first hour, at 4 in the morning, without being asked, because they'd decided to take a walk. Vera stood at the edge of the crater left by the controlled collapse of the tunnel approach and looked at Kalen, who was standing beside her drinking a second cup of coffee. "How?" she said. "Soil reads differently when it's been disturbed from below," he said. "Compaction patterns. We learned to read them a long time ago. Your sensor arrays didn't flag it. Our sensor arrays are designed for what we know to look for." He looked down into the crater. "Humans learned tunnel warfare before we had sensors." Vera processed this. "How long before?" He seemed to calculate. "Roughly 40,000 years before we developed sensor technology capable of detecting subsurface disturbance, we were already hunting each other through cave systems." A pause. "We got very good at it. The first joint operation was a tunnel clearance mission. The Sovereign military's standard protocol for tunnel clearance involved sealing the entrance, flooding the tunnel system with inert gas, waiting for HFY combatants to be incapacitated, and then sending in armored units. It was safe. It was slow. It took between 6 and 40 hours per tunnel system, depending on size." Kalen reviewed the protocol. He used the word interesting in a tone that Vera had already learned in 2 days of working with him. "Men, I have a different idea. Your gas approach works against HFY and sealed systems," he said, standing over the tactical map. "But the HFY aren't sealing their systems during active operations. There are 17 ventilation access points in this tunnel network. The gas disperses before it builds to effective concentration." The Sovereign tactical officer, a veteran named Dresh, looked at him with the particular expression of a professional who has been doing something a certain way for 20 years and does not enjoy having it questioned. "We are aware of the limitations. The protocol. What if we go in?" Kalen said. "Silence." "Into the tunnels," Vera said carefully. "Manually." "Yes." "Against HFY combatants." Dresh leaned forward. "In their optimal combat environment. In close quarters. Against a species that evolved in these conditions." "Yes," Kalen said again, with the same pleasant calm he brought to every sentence. "That is," Dresh said, searching for a diplomatic phrasing, "inadvisable." Kalen looked at him steadily. "The HFY evolved in tunnels. Humans hunted in them." A brief pause. "Those are different things." No one said anything. "Evolution optimizes you for the environment," he continued, pulling up a schematic. "A species that evolved underground is adapted to those conditions. A species that chose to go underground, that learned to fight there because it was necessary, that species understood how to use the environment as a weapon." He pointed to the ventilation access points on the map. "We go in through here, here, and here. 3 4-person teams. The HFY will expect the tunnels to be their advantage. We're going to make them a liability." Dresh stared at the map. "You're going to fight them in the dark." "No," Kalen said. "We're going to fight them in our dark." The mission took 47 minutes. The Sovereign tactical team monitoring from the surface had sensors in the tunnel network. Not enough to detect the HFY approach earlier, but enough to track combatant movement. For the first 11 minutes, the readings made sense. Human heat signatures moving through the tunnel network, HFY signatures converging. Then the HFY signatures stopped converging. Then they started moving away. Dresh watched the tactical display with 4 eyes and said nothing for a long time. "They're retreating," the sensor operator said, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. "The HFY are retreating through their own tunnel system." The mission concluded at the 47-minute mark when Kalen's voice came through the calm, unhurried. "Network is clear. We found their main junction chamber. They were using it as a staging area." A brief pause. "We've collapsed it. Suggest geological survey of the northeast sector. There's a secondary network that your sensors probably haven't mapped." Vera keyed her calm. "Casualties? 2 minor injuries. Rains took a cut. Petrov has a bruised rib." Another pause. "The HFY had this tunnel system for 8 months. There are Sovereign unit insignia on the walls. They were keeping trophies." The calm was quiet for a moment. "Were," Kalen said. Dresh sat back in his command chair and looked at Vera. "They," he said slowly, "are not soldiers." Vera watched the sensor display, where 12 human heat signatures were moving through the cleared tunnel network with the unhurried ease of people walking through familiar territory. No, she said. She thought about what Kalen had said. Evolution optimizes you for the environment. A species that chose to go underground, that learned to fight there because it was necessary, that species understood how to use the environment as a weapon. She thought about a species that had spent 40,000 years hunting in the dark before it had words for what it was doing. A species that had turned every hostile environment it had ever encountered into a classroom and graduated with expertise that outlasted the original threat by geological timescales. A species that showed up to a war already knowing things the enemy had spent centuries believing were their exclusive advantage. No, she said again. She pulled up the request file. Earth soldiers. She thought about what they'd actually gotten. Outside, through the reinforced viewport, the human contingent was emerging from the tunnel access points one by one, moving in the flat, efficient way they always moved, already talking among themselves in the rapid, clipped sentences they used when they were processing and planning. Kalen emerged last. He was, somehow, holding a fresh cup of coffee. He looked up at the observation window, found Vera's eyes, and gave a small nod. Network is clear. Vera nodded back. The Sovereign Collective had requested soldiers. What Earth had sent was something older than soldiers. Something that had existed before armies had names, before wars had rules, before species had decided which environments belonged to them. Something that had gone into the dark 10,000 generations ago and come back knowing things the dark didn't know it had taught. The Hreth Dominion had spent 300 years perfecting tunnel warfare. They had picked a fight with the species that invented it.